Welcome to today's lecture for Module 6, The Designer's Job, Envisioning the World of the Play, Costume. This is one of my favorite lectures because this happens to be my area of expertise, and it is brought to you in part by my patron saint, Edna Mode. So just like last time with scene design, we should start out by asking ourselves, what are the primary responsibilities of a costume designer to a production? So we should probably start with defining the term costume. When we're talking about theater and we're referring to costume, that is all of the clothing that an actor is wearing to portray a character. So that includes, you know, the clothes on the body, also the shoes, the hat, any accessories like jewelry, and it can also include hair and makeup. Some theater companies have their own hair and wig designers and their own makeup designers. Other theater companies do not, and so that falls under the responsibility of the costume designer. So at bottom, the costume designer's responsibility is to create the costumes or the clothing for all of the characters or performers in a show. They're also responsible for the hair and makeup looks. And what costume design does, where scenery design sort of creates the world of the play, the universe in which these characters are living out their lives for the audience, costume's main job is to communicate character. And of course, at bottom, we are here to support the director's interpretation of the text. And there's the list for you. So, what can costume tell an audience about character? If you think back to our lecture on scene design and the curtain rises or the lights come up and the audience can see the set, it's going to give them a lot of clues about the world of the play. What are the clues that costume can give an audience member about character? Take a few seconds and try to jot down as many ideas as you can on this. Here's my list. Costume is going to tell us a lot about the personality of a character. It's going to tell us about their age, right? I mean, what you wore 10 years ago is not at all like what you wear now, and it's probably not what you will wear 10 or 20 or 50 years from now either. Costume tells us a lot about gender, particularly before the mid 20th century or the late 20th century. Costume was very, very gendered. Most of the time, men wore pants and women wore skirts or dresses, and that was pretty much your choice. Today, our style is a lot more unisex, and we're a lot more fluid in terms of strict gender classification, but pretty much throughout human history, you can tell who's who gender-wise based on their clothing. Another big one is social status, right? How much money or wealth or power a character has is going to be determined in their clothing, both in terms of the content of the textiles of that clothing and how expensively made it is. This carries over a little bit still today, right, with designer labels and couture wear or custom made bespoke suits versus TJ Maxx. Certainly, costume can tell us something about the occupation of a character, right? We look at certain pieces of clothing and they create a sort of cultural shorthand in our brain. So somebody wearing a white lab coat, we think doctor or lab technician or other medical or science professional, right? We think of, a blue uniform with a peak hat and we think, police officer. There's lots and lots and lots of other examples of kind of occupation specific clothing. Also, the occasion. If I walked into class wearing a full-length ball gown and a tiara, you would think it's odd. Likewise, you would probably think it odd if I walked into class wearing fuzzy bunny slippers and a bathrobe and my hair up in curlers. We get a sense of what is appropriate to wear at different times of the day and in different contexts with other people. And throughout different periods of history, there have been more or fewer of those rules guiding what is appropriate to wear at different times of day and in different social contexts. Obviously, clothing can tell us a lot about the geographical location of a character. If they're all bundled up in sweaters and mittens. We understand they're somewhere cold, and if they're wearing, a sleeveless, billowy linen dress or a tank top and shorts, we assume they're somewhere warm. Obviously, it gets a lot more complex than that. So geographical location and climate. There'll also be things about, certain regional ethnic groups or religious communities or kind of indigenous folk where is going to be specific to different places on planet Earth. Even though we are now a global society, I mean, until a couple weeks ago, right? And people could kind of travel anywhere within a few hours. Um, Certain geographical regions tend to retain their kind of cultural flavor from centuries past. As I said, time of day, right? This is kind of related to occasion, and this varies, from culture to culture and decade to decade. But sometimes what you wear in the morning is not considered appropriate for the evening. If any of you have ever tried to plan a wedding, or be a part of a wedding, you will probably hear a lot from a wedding planner about what the men in particular should and shouldn't wear based on whether your wedding is happening in the morning or the afternoon or the evening. Um, Other things on this list, the costume can communicate one's state of mind or their self image. And I'm sure you recognize this in your own lives. When you feel good about yourself and what's going on in a particular day, you're going to dress in a way that shows off your confidence. And then there are other days where you would just rather hide from the world and you're going to dress in a way that helps you to hide from the world as well. And sometimes we can see a person dressed inappropriately and we can make some assumptions, or not can, but we might make some assumptions about their state of mental health. If someone is all bundled up in layers and layers and layers of clothing, although it's a warm, sunny day outside, we might wonder, are they homeless? And so therefore they're carrying all of their clothes with them on their back? Or do they not feel the temperature the way we do? So sometimes somebody dressed inappropriately is a sign of mental distress. And lastly, costume can communicate one character's relationship to other characters. We see this all the time, right? Most obviously in real life, in sporting events, you can pick out who's rooting for the Red Sox and who's rooting for the Yankees, based on the clothing that they're wearing. We can tell not only the teams apart by their uniforms, but also the people in the stands. And even if you're in high school, I'm sure you could recall certain groups of kids dressing in a particular style and other groups of kids adopting their own style. So there's a sense of kind of belongingness, when we share certain types of garments or style of dress. So all of these things are true in the real world, and they're at least as true in the world of costume design. In addition to all of that, good costume design can also help communicate the style of a production, right? The degree of realism or abstraction. If you were trying to very, very meticulously recreate a specific historical time period, then you're going to be very, very, detail oriented on getting the correct fabric, the correct shape of a garment, all that kind of stuff. But if you're just doing kind of, a wackadoo comedy, you're going to have very exaggerated shapes. You might have very intensely bright colors. You might have things that overtly clash. And so we're going to understand that this is supposed to be kind of goofy. So costume can also communicate the mood and the tone of the play, as well as the degree of realism or abstraction, or whether we're in a particular historical period or a particular style. So here are some examples in the next few slides. This is from the 1981 National Theater's production of the Oresteia. Costume designer is Jocelyn Herbert. This is the Greek chorus. From this play, the Oresteia is a trilogy of Greek plays about the myth of Orestes, who was a son of Agamemnon. Long story. But anyway, So here's the chorus. So you can see that all of these actors are wearing masks. They all have kind of wigs attached to those masks that give them all the same style of hair. And they're wearing, I don't think they're identical. It's a little blurry in this photo, but their costumes are very similar, if not identical. And this is obviously not trying for realism per se. This is very stylized. That mask is very, kind of flat um, compared to a human face. All of their expressions are frozen in one expression of, I don't know, trepidation or nervous inquiry. Inquiry. Um, and obviously the hair is all the same, right? So they're functioning as a unit, not as individual personalities. Here is another example. This is also, I think this is also the National Theater. It played over in England and then also did a short run here in New York in like 2015. Oh, BBC 2014, and then in New York in 2015. So this is Macbeth and Lady Macbeth from Shakespeare's Macbeth. And here, right, these are fairly realistic costumes. We look at him and we can make some assumptions about what he does for a living. Yes, we assume this is not a banker. This guy seems to be a warrior. We look at her costume. We assume she's not a warrior. This is what my daughter would say when she was young. She's like, there are certain people that are outside the castle protecting the people inside, and then there are the people inside the castle. I feel like that was a little bit of a diss towards me, but whatever, I'm fine. So anyway, you look at his costume and you can see that, it's very utilitarian. It's very, kind of thick and padded like armor. He's not really worried about being pretty, whatever you might think about the personal attractiveness of Kenneth Branagh. Um, there's that plaid tartan there, so you're getting this sense of the Scottishness, which is what this play is about. You can't see his full body, but that tartan becomes, like a kilt around his waist. And then you look at Alex Kingston, who's playing Lady Macbeth, and she's wearing a fitted gown that is of rather high quality. His stuff is high quality too for all of its roughness. It's just well worn, but um, that leather is expensive. So we're learning about their social status, we're learning about their occupation. And while we can see, one is obviously very male and one is very female because this dress is conforming to her feminine form, they're united still by color because they have those reds and ochres in their costumes. So we can kind of see them working together, even though they're not totally twinning it. This is a production photo from a play called Hay Fever by Noel Coward. And this was a kind of dry satire about the silliness of upper class British society in the 1920s. So you can see the costumes here are very, very specific to time and place. You can see that woman sitting in the black cocktail dress with the long beads and the bobbed hair. She very much kind of a 20s flapper girl, and the woman sitting next to her with the cloche hat, the guy all the way on the right hand side with his striped dressing gown and his Oxford bag pants. All of this is telling us 1920s, 1920s, 1920s. And you look at this group and you can see, even though they're all of the same period, there seems to be some difference in social class and some difference in who's kind of following the rules of how good society is supposed to dress and who is not. And then here we have a photograph from, I can't even pronounce it, Waukesha Civic Theater, their production of Seussical the Musical. This is the part of the musical that's all about Gertrude McFuzz and the birds. And Gertrude McFuzz is a bird with a very, unassuming tail. And she really wants to have fancy tails like those birds on the left. And very much so like, I think her name is Maisie. I can't remember the bird on the right, who's kind of the fanciest bird of them all. So these women are supposed to be birds. Now we look at them and we don't think bird, right? They look obviously like women, but there's all these feathers all over their costumes and they're all kind of flouncy and frilly. And so there's sense of movement and, you know, airiness to them. And they're all rather silly and they're in these super bright colors, except for Gertrude McFuzz, who's, very kind of pale and washed out compared to them. And she lacks all of that fancy trim on the back of her dress and in her hair like the rest of them. So we're abstract. It's a totally different kind of style from Hay Fever, even though they're both kind of comedies. Um, and they're both taking different tones. Okay, so to achieve some of these effects, a costume designer has to depend on their tools. And with costume, the material that they have to work with is at bottom, it's the human body. It's all about manipulating a human body, where a set designer was manipulating an empty space to be filled with a set to create the world. The costume designer is manipulating a human body, which sounds like a terrible thing to do. But let me tell you, this is what we do every single time we get dressed. We are manipulating everybody's perception of our own bodies. So we can do that basically in 4 ways. We can manipulate the silhouette, we can manipulate the texture, we can manipulate the color, and we can manipulate accent. So let's define our terms. When we're talking about silhouette in terms of costume, we're talking about the outline of a human body when it is dressed. Maybe when you were little, you went to a fair or a carnival and had a silhouette portrait taken, and that's when like you stand to the side and they shine a bright light on one side of your face, and then your face casts a shadow onto the wall behind you of your face in portrait. And so someone will trace around the edge of your face, cut it out in black paper and mount it on white paper, and that's your silhouette portrait. So we're talking about the same thing with costume, right? It's like if somebody was standing on stage in a costume and we shone a bright light on them and it projected the image of their body in the costume onto, a paper behind them, and we traced around it, we would see the outline of their body in the costume, and that is the silhouette. So the point of all this is that we can, depending on how we cut and fit the clothes around the body, we're going to reveal things or conceal things or distort or exaggerate what Mother Nature has given us. And we do this all the time. We have done this ever since we created clothing many, many thousands upon thousands of years ago. And the fashionable silhouette changes throughout history. And when you get a little practice, you can very easily see what is fashionable and what is not based on its silhouette. Even in little subtle things, like until very recently, people wouldn't be caught dead in mom jeans, right? Which were the very high-waisted, kind of pleated at the waist jeans that were popular in the 80s and 90s, because that is an unfashionable silhouette. Because the jeans companies want us to buy more jeans, they kind of recut the shape of jeans every few years so that we have to toss out our old jeans and buy new ones. And then, as soon as we've tossed out our old jeans, they come back into style again, and then we kind of have to go buy the new version of them. So here's an example of what I mean. On the left-hand side is a fashionable silhouette in 1775, and on the right-hand side is a fashionable silhouette from 1928. It's not the same woman in either one, but it could be, right? So let's start on the left-hand side and tell me what is revealed, what is concealed, and what is distorted by this silhouette. There's not much really that's revealed. She's turned slightly to the side so we can kind of see the side of her face. We can see the bottom half of her arm and her hand, pretty much as Mother Nature made it, although she's holding a fan in one hand, so that kind of becomes a distortion in its own way. What is concealed is, everything below the waist is completely hidden in this kind of tea cozy of a dress. She is wearing underneath these skirts what are called paniers, which are very wide, boned hoop skirts that are holding all of the volume of those skirts into place, all the way down from the waist to the ankle. And then on her head, she's also got her own natural hair and then some sort of wig or hat or feathers or a combination of all the above. So we have even gotten distorted the size and shape of her skull by this headwear that she's got on. Her elbows are kind of distorted because she's got all of these sleeve ruffles we can't see. And what is accentuated here is the narrowness of her waist. She is made to look like she has a very, very tiny waist. And very, very wide hips. Compare that to the lady on the right-hand side from 1928. A lot more of her body is actually revealed. We can see her legs from about mid-thigh down to the ankle. We can see her arms from the shoulder to the wrist. We can see her neck, especially the back of her neck, because she has cut her hair into a bob. And so now we can see this. But what is concealed is much of her torso, right? She's almost become a rectangle from the shoulder to the mid thigh. So her slim waistline and a round bosom and round hip is not at all what is the fashionable silhouette here. Instead, the fashionable silhouette is basically a box. And then we've also kind of further distorted her figure with these kind of feathery fringes on the edges of her dress. You can see that it's layers all the way down her dress, and ending at the hem. And those will move as she moves, and they'll kind of flutter and flow. And some people say that this is where we got the nickname flapper for this woman from this era. She is also wearing gloves all the way up to her elbow, so her arm is kind of partially concealed or accentuated, but you see the gist. Also, she's wearing very tall high heels, so her height is a little bit distorted or exaggerated by, kind of putting her on these teetery heels. Um, but you can see what is considered fashionable is very different from one century to the next. Of course, most of the time we don't look at people in black and white outlines of themselves, but we can still talk about the silhouette. So now that we've had a little practice of looking at it kind of in black and white, let's look at men's silhouettes from 1530 and 1775 and 1943. So the dude on the left is King Henry VIII, and this was considered kind of the height of the masculine physique at this time. And so what is revealed here, what is concealed, what is exaggerated, what is de-emphasized? Well, we can see his legs, particularly his calves and his knees. He's wearing very tight hose that are showing off an athletic leg. His shoulders are very, very broad. Those sleeves are super puffy. They are probably padded on the inside. You can see his main tunic is slashed, and out of the little holes from the slashes are coming little puffs of fabric from the layer underneath. So he's kind of got this all over padding, and he's kind of taking up as much space in the room as he can. Um, and some of this is trying to de-emphasize his broadening belly. King Henry VIII was a very reportedly handsome, athletic, tall, kind of hunky guy when he was young, and then once he reached middle age, he tended to gain weight and be considerably less handsome and less athletic than he had been before. And so part of his attempt to be like, no, I'm still young, I'm still cute, was to dress in a way that broadened out his shoulders super wide so that you wouldn't notice how wide his belly was. And then he felt his legs were still attractive. So this very tightly knitted stocking drew the attention to his shapely calves. We see this again in the man silhouette from 1775, whereas Henry VIII is wearing, a tunic that stops above the knee. This guy has some trousers that stop right below the kneecap, but they've still got very tight fitting hose that are showing off a shapely leg and calf. The silhouette has changed a little bit here, whereas Henry VIII's kind of overcoat piece is taking up a lot of room with these super wide puffy shoulders and the really full skirts of it. This gentleman's coat is cut very, very close to the body, and the shoulders are almost droopy. They're very kind of narrow, and they're not padded at all. But this suit coat is cut in a way that is kind of going to force this gentleman, if this were a real person, to kind of force his shoulders back and his chest out so that he would have to stand very erect and tall and stiff. You notice also that this coat is kind of cut so that it almost meets in the front at the neck, and then it deliberately is cut so that it falls away down the chest and around to the hips. This is because this is kind of the era of King George III and King George II and George Washington and all of these men. Some of these men tended to be rather on the pear-shaped side of things, and so rather than try to de-accentuate a belly, they cut their clothes in a way that just said, well, here it is. And so it's fashionable. And so then everybody else looked like they had a belly, even if they didn't. Note to the hair here. This is kind of a paper approximation of a wig, but men in this era, fashionable men in this era, did not wear their own hair. They would often wear a wig over it, or they might powder their own hair or powder their wig. And so the wig is curled in a very particular way, those kind of turned up springy curls right at the ears, and then there's another layer underneath them, and then the length of the hair is gathered into a ponytail at the back of the neck, which is very different from Henry VIII's haircut, which was pretty short. Over on the picture on the right-hand side from 1943, this is a young man from LA, and he is wearing a zoot suit. So zoot suits were this kind of youth counterculture thing developed in the 40s. We were at war, we were rationing fabric so that people were buying smaller amounts of fabric, and so suits were cut very, very narrow so that all of the extra fabric could be used towards the war effort. And some young men bought intentionally oversized suits, and they padded the shoulders so that the shoulders again were broadened, and they had these really, really wide lapels with these sharp peaks on them to make the shoulders appear even broader. And then they nipped the waist in of these jackets to make them look like, kind of an inverted triangle, so that they said, I've got really broad shoulders and I've got a really tiny waist. They flared back out over the hips, and then they had these very full cut pants. They used to call them drapes because they were so drapey and full. And so everything about this suit says, I'm young, I'm athletic, fashionable, and you can't tell me what to do. If there's a war going on and I'm supposed to ration fabric, well, fuck you. I'm going to wear what I want because fashion doesn't stop even if there's a war on. But we don't have to be just talking about a particular historical period when we're talking about silhouette. Here is an example of how we distort the human body with a very imaginative silhouette for the production of The Lion King. These are the same costumes from the opening number in one of the videos that you looked at for last time. So here's Scar on the left and Mufasa on the right from production of The Lion King. So they're obviously humans pretending to be lions. So they have these lion masks, right? And the masks, even though they both look like lions, they are distinct. The mane is shaped different, the facial expression on it is different, the shape of the jaw is slightly different. So unlike the Orostaya masks in that slide a few slides back, these masks have a lot of individual personality in them. They've also got tails, right? But they don't look like real lion tails. But you can see also they're in these kind of like corset brace things and these really drapey pants, and they've extended their hands with these kind of claw appendages. And these masks, instead of sitting flat on their head, you can see they're kind of on like poles from behind their necks going up over their head. And so they're extending the human form beyond the natural confines of the body. So they've elongated their bodies and elongated their heads by putting these masks on past them. And just like that video from a couple class periods back we look at these and we say, aha, lion, we get it right away. But at the same time, we know these aren't, quote, realistic lions. These are obviously humans in lion costumes. So the style of this show is still quite abstract. They're not attempting to faithfully recreate, a true to life lion that is going to fool us all, because that would be kind of ridiculous. What they do with these costumes, though, is in the colors and the textures and the patterns on them, they're using a lot of material that would be found on the African savanna. And these are kind of traditional fabric painting and dyeing techniques that people indigenous to that part of the world would use. So these costumes are kind of a cultural celebration of the Serengeti, as well as being costumes of character. So this is a good segue to talk about texture, right? Similar to what we talked about last time with scene design, texture is all about the materials used to make a costume and how a costume feels, how it looks, how it behaves. Most of the time, when we're talking about materials to make a costume, we are talking about textiles. We're talking about cotton, linen, wool, silk, or manufactured fibers like polyester or rayon or acetate or whatever. But we might also be talking about metal or plastic or who even knows what, right? Just because it's often textiles that we use in making garments. There are other materials that we can use too. If you just look back at that last slide, you can see there seems to be grass and bamboo and other kinds of materials used as well. Anyway, so with texture, with costume, it's going to be rough or smooth, it's going to be heavy or light, it might be stiff or it might be soft and drapey. And texture is really going to kind of communicate a sense of, luxury or poverty. You can tell a lot about somebody's socioeconomic status by the kind of material that is in their clothing, even if the shape of the costume itself is the same. And depending on what the texture is, it may move with the body or it might resist movement. Think about a ballet dancer's skirt that kind of ebbs and flows as the dancer moves about. And then think about that Marie Antoinette skirt that is being held in place with a wire cage of panniers. And that sucker really isn't going to move at all. It's going to hold its shape no matter what you do to it. So here we have Kiki Palmer starring as Cinderella in the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella from about 2012. Costumes are designed by William Ivy Long. So on the left-hand side is, Cinderella as poor Cinderella. And then the costume on the right is Cinderella after the fairy godmother has given her her magic dress and off she goes to the ball. But if you look carefully, the silhouette between these two dresses is quite similar. Kind of an hourglass shape, wide across the shoulders and bosom, narrow at the waist, widening over the hips. Yes, the dress on the left is shorter, but it's that same kind of like bell shape, round skirt shape. But look at the textures from each of them. The textures on the left are very kind of rough and nubby and simple, and they look like something she might have spun herself at home. Whereas the textures on the right are very light, they're diaphanous, they're flowy, they're shimmery, they look light and puffy as air and quite expensive. Here's another contrast in texture. This is designs from HBO's Game of Thrones, right? So there's Daenerys on the left and Jon Snow on the right. So texture and color and character revealed in these two costumes. Dany's costume, again, light, airy, flowy, soft, shiny, kind of a little diaphanous. And his is, heavy. It's really furry and rough and leathery and stiff and kind of impenetrable. She, at this point in the series, is wandering around in the desert countries, gathering her army and learning how to handle dragons. He is up on the wall on the north edge of the kingdom trying to fight the like zombie people, the whites. So they're dressed for their climate, they're dressed for their social status, they're dressed for their job, they're dressed for the occasion, and we're also learning something about their character as well. And don't forget color. They really couldn't be at more opposite ends of the color spectrum here. She is in, white or off-white and very, very pale blue, and he is almost head to toe black. So yeah, let's spend a little bit more time talking about color. Color, really, for us human beings, it's going to evoke an emotional response into us a lot of times. We really resonate with color. And we have a lot of cultural cues embedded in color when it comes to costume and clothing. We here in America, we see a woman in a white diaphanous dress, we think, oh, bride. And we see someone dressed head to toe in black, and we think, where's the funeral? Or are you a goth? Whereas in other cultures, white is for funerals, red might be for bride. Color in theater also helps us identify who belongs with who on the stage. So, like a sports team with the uniforms. And color can also help focus our attention on one character or a set of characters in any given moment. I don't know if you ever saw Schindler's List from a few decades ago, which is shot in black and white. But there's a scene or two where there's, a whole chaotic scene going on with dozens and dozens of people kind of running back and forth through the screen. And then there's one little girl who is wearing a coat that has been colorized a pale pink. You can't help but stare at her because she is, one of these things not like the other in that whole scene. She's trying to stand out for us. The director wants us to notice her, and so he had them colorize her coat so that she would stand out. Here are some more examples. In Romeo and Juliet, the play starts off telling us about the two houses both alike in dignity. He's talking about the Montagues and the Capulets, and they are fighting with each other. And the first scene of the play is with a big fight between servants of the Capulets fighting against the servants of the Montagues, and then the kind of lord and master of each of the household gets involved and their wives get involved, and it's sort of like everybody is on stage fighting and fighting and fighting. It's really important for us to know who is who, or at least who is on whose side during this play. And so color can really help us with that. A lot of times a designer does warm colors, reds, oranges, yellows for the Capulets, and they do cool colors, blues and greens and purples for the Montagues. So it literally becomes like a sports team, and we know who's team Capulet and who's team Montague. Here's another look at that shot from last class's slideshow from Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. So again, this is the court scene. And in this version of the play, Hamlet always talks about, his father died while he was away at university. He was called back home. He finds his mother has very hastily married his uncle, and he's become king. And Hamlet is distressed by this in a whole number of ways. And in this scene, Hamlet's mother tells him, "Hamlet, could you please stop wearing black? I understand you miss your dad, but kind of like, let's move on." And Hamlet's reply to this is basically in iambic pentameter poetry that I can't possibly begin to match. But he says basically, black is what I wear on the outside because black is how I feel on the inside. And I'm not interested in, happy talk just to make you feel better. So in this movie version of Hamlet, Kenneth Branagh, the director, has turned this court scene into like the wedding celebration. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's that white veil, which to all of us, in America and Western Europe in the 21st century, we think, bride. A lot of people, when they look at this still, they assume that figure in black at the very center is a priest because we're like, it's a wedding. She's obviously the bride. The guy on the right must be the groom, and he kind of looks like Prince Charming in that red coat with the gold epaulets on it. So the guy in black in the middle must be the priest. Nope, it's Hamlet. But look at the entire cast of characters around them. The dominant color in this scene is red and gold and white. Everybody is in some combination of red and gold and white, down to the king and queen. The only one who is not is Hamlet. So he stands out like a sore thumb. You can see also with this, the king is dressed in a military style uniform coat. Everybody on those stands, this is obviously the court of Elsinore. They're all in uniform. So this is a society that is very, very militant. Everybody's connected to the military. Hamlet is not. So he stands out in a lot of ways. If you look very carefully on the right-hand side of the screenshot, you can see there's a man in a white coat, there's a man in a gold coat, and then there's a woman in a red coat and skirt. That is Ophelia in the red outfit, and that's her dad next to her in gold and her brother next to him in white. So you can see even the women in this world have kind of adopted military styles into their clothing. All right, on to accent. Accents are just kind of little bits and pieces on a costume that helps focus our attention on a character out of a group or onto a specific part of a costume. I used to work with a cutter draper who's like a tailor in a professional theatrical costume shop, and he used to refer to these accents as moments. He would say like, I think we need a little moment right here. And what he meant was we need a little place for the eye to come to rest and really focus on a detail. So when we talk about accents, we might be talking about accessories like jewelry or a belt or a hairdo or a hat, or it might be something as simple as a color contrast on an outfit. For example, this is from the recent Broadway revival of Anything Goes, which is a musical. Everybody's on a luxury ocean liner in like the 1930s, and one of the main characters is Reno Sweeney, who's a famous nightclub singer. And this is her and her backup dancers, who she calls the angels. So in this scene, who attracts your attention? It's the lady in the center, right? There's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. There's probably 20 people in the background. Most of them are men, although you can see a couple of women there, but they're all in black and white. So they kind of fade into the background really far. You have to kind of like be searching them out to really kind of notice them. Your attention is drawn on those five ladies in the front because they're in gold and red kind of flaming costumes. There's also quite a bit more skin revealed on them. Everybody else is covered up from neck to floor, and they've got a lot of bare leg and bare arm showing. Um, and they're shimmery, and they have that kind of flappery fringe on them. So they are much more showy costumes. So our eye is drawn right to that kind of quintet in the front. But if you look a little closer, of those five women, your eye is going to be drawn to the gal in the center because her costume has much more detail on it. It has a much more higher contrast between the red and the gold. It has a kind of like flame detail that's curving up all over the bodice. And so she's the star. So that's why our eye is going to be naturally drawn to her. This is what my costume professor would refer to as a star turn costume. But even if it's just a simple black and white costume, you can still have accent that draws your attention. Here's Michael Jackson, right about 1982, doing some signature dance moves. His signature style from this era was one white sequined glove, and he tended to wear his pants very narrow at the ankle, almost pegged, and they tended to be a little bit on the short side. And he would wear contrasting color socks. Wasn't because he was buying his pants too short and they were high waters or floods. He wanted us to look at his feet. And with the sequin glove, it's shiny, it's a contrast to his skin. We're going to be drawn to look at that one hand also. That's because as much as he was a singer, he was also a dancer, right? He is kind of if not the inventor, then certainly the popularizer of the moonwalk and lots of other signature dance moves. And he's doing one right here. And so by having this contrast in color and in having this kind of shape that revealed his feet and this glove on his hand, he wanted us to constantly have our eye drawn to his feet and to his hand because he was doing these kind of revolutionary dance moves. He wanted us all to pay attention to that. Super clever. And this is a character, Lady Bracknell, from The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. So here, she's got accents all over her costume. The whole costume is bright. It draws a lot of focus because it's kind of flaming orange, just like the Reno Sweeney costumes in the slide a couple back. But even within it, you can see these kind of like triangle shaped cuts in her skirt that kind of act as arrows pointing you up from the floor towards her waist. And then you've got this other kind of big triangle of that lacy ruffle down her bosom that kind of draws your eye up to her chin. And then she's got this giant hat with all of these feathers that are kind of pointing you back down to her face. You can't not be drawn into that space in between her hat and her ruffled jabot there, right? It's all about look at her face, look at her face, look at her face. So a good costume designer is going to know how to make the most of silhouette, texture, color, and accent to get kind of the most bang for their buck in communicating the most information to an audience in a short amount of time. But what other skills should a costume designer have to be successful? What should they know, or what should they be able to do well? Well, it certainly helps to have, rather extensive knowledge of costume history, because you could be called upon to design a play from any era at any given time. And so you should be able to know how to communicate the ideas of that time period to an audience. Even if they don't necessarily know it well themselves, you want to be able to kind of point them in the right direction. It also helps to be an excellent at text analysis, just like we said with directing and scene design and everything else, right? Because all of those clues are right there in the text. You need to be able to find them. You should be good at drawing and painting because this is how you communicate a lot of your ideas. It's also super helpful if you have at least some knowledge of sewing and pattern making so that you can communicate when you're drawing or painting your designs and when you're talking to the people who are going to make your costumes. If you're lucky enough to have people that make costumes for you, they need to understand what it is you want it to actually do. And so it will help you a hell of a lot if you have, a good working knowledge of what the heck you're talking about. One last thing I think that's really important for a costume designer to have is some insight into psychoanalysis and some good people skills. Scene designers, they're creating the world of the play. As long as they can grunt out some instructions to their shop foreman, it's going to get built. A costume designer has to convince an actor to wear the stuff they're making. And, an actor in a fitting is a very vulnerable creature because we are seeing them almost naked. Costume designers know their measurements, they know their flaws of their body, right? We're all human, we all have flaws. They know, kind of what an actor's problem area is going to be. And sometimes the costume is not going to flatter the actor because it's not appropriate for their character to look gorgeous. And even if an actor knows this intellectually, sometimes that's really hard for them to kind of be sold on. So you really have this close relationship with the actor, and you've got to have a good working relationship with them. You've got to be able to communicate your ideas to them well, and you've got to kind of get them to buy into what you're trying to do with the costume. And there they are all listed out for you. Okay, so the design process. You should know this by now. First step once you've been hired is you've got to read that play, you've got to analyze it, you've got to take all these copious notes on the clues that the play is going to tell you about place and time and occasion, about character, about all of those levels of characterization we just talked about earlier in this presentation. And anything, you need to know, like, oh, they're going outside, so they might need a coat, or oh, now this scene is, 3 months later than that scene, so maybe they need a sweater, or oh, I see this character has gotten pregnant, so I might need to make a pregnancy belly, right? All this kind of stuff. So you read the play, you analyze the play, you take all of these notes, you meet with the director and the rest of the design team, you learn what the director's concept is going to be, then you go away and do your research, you do some sketches. Sketches or drawings, oftentimes in pencil. You might make collages as well. You're going to show these to the director, you're going to get feedback, you're going to go away again, you're going to do some more, and then eventually you're going to do some renderings. The rendering is the painted sketch with a color on it and a sense of texture. And there's not necessarily a straight line, but there's a whole lot of like wiggling back and forth in here. And it's quite typical for a designer, whether it be a scene designer or a costume designer, to not end up with the original idea because it's a back and forth process. And in fact, sometimes you get your designs just perfect. And then the director casts the show and they end up hiring an actor who is all wrong for the costume you just designed, right? Because different body types are going to look different in the same clothes. So sometimes you have to kind of recalibrate your ideas once the show has been cast. All right, then. So where do you start looking for your research? Well, the best place to look for any of it is not the freaking internet. It's books, art books. For thousands of years, sculpture and painting was how we got a record of what people were wearing. So look at the old masters' paintings, look at the sculptures from the era. If you can find museum exhibits of existing costume or gowns from previous eras, look at those. Once we get into the 19th century, we've got photographs. Look at photographs from the era if a historical era is important to you, right? Go out and look at real people. I mean, if you've ever seen, there's a blog called Humans of New York that's all about street fashion. It's incredible to me how inventive people are with their own clothes every single given day. And street fashion informs high fashion, and high fashion informs street fashion, and back and forth and round and round. So be a keen observer of real people. Check out museum archives. Last summer, I had an incredible opportunity. I got to study in London and I got to go into a couple of seriously amazing costume collections, and I got to study in detail historic garments from the 18th and 19th centuries, and it was just amazing. You can look at a picture all you like, but seeing the real thing is just what? Crazy. Also, look at the world around you. Look at flowers, look at animals, look at the sky. All of these things can inspire you. There was one time I designed a show and I brought in a rag rug from my kitchen floor. And I said, this is the color palette. It's right in here. And they're like, oh, yeah, it totally is. So inspiration can be anywhere you look. Eventually, you've got to kind of share your ideas with people. So here's the way you can do it. You can do sketches and renderings, right? A rendering, as I said, is a color image of a character in costume that the costume designer has created. It's usually painted. You can do black and white pencil sketches as well, or color pencil, or you can do, magic markers. You can do things online with digital design and drawing tools there, but basically renderings or painted sketches. Fabric swatches. A swatch is a small sample of a fabric that you want to be used in a costume. And sometimes just having a little snippet of that textile there with your rendering or sketch really helps communicate what that costume is going to look like and feel like. You might want to do a research collage, right? This is just like the research morgue from the scene design project. Sometimes, there are plenty of designers out there who suck at drawing, but they can still communicate their ideas. And so they might use collage. You'll see some examples in just a few minutes. Or a mood board, which is kind of a fancier kind of collage, right? It's a whole collection of images, going to be fabric swatches, might be little snippets of text and other inspirational things that you organize in one physical or digital board, and you're communicating the concept or the feel of a costume design. You use these renderings or boards to communicate your ideas to your director, to your actors, and to the technicians who are going to be building the costumes for you. Here's an example of a sketch for a costume in King Lear. It is far too blurry to make out all of these notes, but as you can see, they've done a fairly detailed sketch of the costume from the front, they've done a sketchier sketch of the costume from the back, and they've done a couple of detailed drawings on what that helmet looks like and what's underneath the helmet, and then they've put a whole bunch of notes around them so that anyone looking at this sketch in its original form, not this blurred out one, can read those notes and really get an understanding of what the designer is thinking. In contrast, here are a couple of renderings, the painted sketch in color from the Broadway production of Aladdin. And obviously, seeing something in color, there's just a lot more life to it. We get much more of a sense of what the costume is going to be. And they're also communicating, a little bit of texture and silhouette here as well. You can see that skirt really flowing around that dancer's body, and you can see kind of the stiffness of Aladdin's vest compared to kind of the soft drapey wrinkliness of his pants. Here are some costume renderings that aren't painted. This person has cut out pieces of photos from magazines and stuck them together to create the silhouette, and then cut out some faces and hair and pieced them together to make a collage that mimics the silhouette of the costumes. And so you really get a sense of what they want these costumes to look like, even though this person maybe doesn't know how to draw. I mean, they've got these really lovely buildings in the background, so maybe they do, and they just thought this would be more fun, but there you go. Here's a very simple collage that a student has done. So you can see it looks like they just kind of went to LOB and said, these boots, this jacket, these jeans, and then they drew a pencil sketch of the character wearing these items so that you can get a sense of how they look all together. And here are some different ways that you can kind of collect and display your research. So some designers like to keep a notebook or a sketch journal. And so here's someone trying out different ideas from what looks like 18th century inspired gowns or overgowns. And they're looking at different ways to drape the fabric and different ways to cut the fabric away from the body, different ways to shape the skirt. So they're trying some things out. Here is a research collage that I presented to my director when we did this play called The Rhinoceros a few years ago. So if you look at the upper left-hand corner of this panel, you can see, a photograph of 3 people. The woman in the center is a character called the waitress. And so that is what we ended up with. And the other images on this board were my starting point for how I thought I wanted her to look. I was like, she's kind of gothy, maybe she's a little rockabilly, but she's kind of tough girl and is a little kind of fashion aggressive. And so that's how I translated it. And here's another research collage for a show I did here called The Arabian Nights. In the center is the photograph of the actor in what he eventually wore on stage. You can see the top right-hand corner, there was a t-shirt that I really liked. It had some Arabic poetry on it, and so I basically stole that t-shirt and put it on him. And then I was looking at kind of like hip-hop pants and different kinds of Western and Mideastern looks kind of cobbled together. The photo is a little bit blurry, but he's wearing a kufi cap that you can see in some of these other images as well. Here's an example of something that's more like a mood board, because here, beyond just some images, we've got kind of three-dimensional, color paint chips. We've got some swatches of fabric. We've got some trims. We've got some fashion illustrations from a period. We've got a photograph of a recreation of a period blouse. And then on the upper right-hand corner, we've got a photograph of a woman from the period. So even without a complete rendering, I could show this to a director and be like, I think the character is somewhere in here. So this might be a good starting point before I make my final decisions about what the actual specifics of the costume is going to look like. This is not my design. You can see down in the right-hand corner the designer's name. I'm trying to read it to you and I can't see it clearly here, but anywho, wonderful designer who is not me. They were working on a production called Metamorphoses. On the left-hand side of this, you can see some of her inspirational research. Then you can see her really beautiful, evocative sketch. You can see a fabric swatch on the right-hand side, and in the top right-hand corner, a photograph of what the actress looked like in the dress in production. Here's another one from that same production. This was for a character called Hunger, right? So the character in that previous slide was a mythological woman named Alcyone, or Alcyone. So she was, supposed to look like a highborn woman, vaguely ancient Greek. But how do you design a costume for, this abstract idea of hunger? Well, so this person looked up, images of starving people, which is rather upsetting, and looked up some other images of, kind of artist renditions of hunger. And she looks like she came up with this kind of full body suit that's painted to look skeletal and starving and thin. And then again, you can see color swatch or fabric swatches on the right-hand side, and then the photograph from the production. So these boards are really kind of letting you see how the designer's mind is working through a problem. Here's one more from this production. You can see this designer is really trying to work this idea of, how do I work this kind of Greek mythology into a modern looking show that doesn't feel like, a toga party, because Metamorphoses is all about Greek mythology. In the next several slides, there are going to be a bunch of different Ophelia costumes from different movie productions of Hamlet. So they're all in different historical time periods. They all have different ideas about the character and different ideas about the world of the play. So you can just kind of see how people had different takes on the same idea. The photographs are from 3 different scenes in which Ophelia appears. The first one is like the first scene that we see her with her brother or with the full court in Act 1. Second set of images is from Act 3, when she has been sent by her father to tell Hamlet, yes, you were interested with me, you sent me some love poems, but I have to break up with you. The idea is that everybody thinks that Hamlet is madly in love with Ophelia and that has driven him mad. And so they think if she says we have to break up, he's going to say, no, I can't live without you. We have to get married. And then they get married and everyone is going to be happy. So this character has a particular agenda in that scene. And, you can decide whether or not she's willingly participating in this kind of trickery or if she's reluctant. And then the final set of images is from Ophelia's mad scene. Her father has been murdered by Hamlet accidentally, but that's kind of a relationship breaker. And Ophelia has just kind of come unmoored because of this. So this is from the 1990 Zeffirelli film with Helena Bonham Carter playing Ophelia. This film is set very squarely in the medieval period, around 1000 AD. The way her hair is braided, the silhouettes of the clothing, the kinds of fabrics used are all indicating this period. Also, a big clue here is in this left-hand picture, she's working on some embroidery, which would be a very, ladylike thing for her to be doing. And that piece of embroidery is mimicking the Bayeux tapestry, which is a piece of embroidery that tells the story of the conquering of England by William of Hastings or William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. So this is like the 11th century or thereabouts. So we can see things about her. She has a lot of clothing covering her from head to foot. Her neck is fully covered. Her sleeves are all the way down to her wrists. Her dress goes all the way down to the floor. We don't get much of a sense of her body underneath there. So we might think, I think this is a cold climate because this fabric looks rather woolly or thick. And, there's a whole lot of her body covered, and that's her dad next to her, and he's wearing something that's trimmed in fur. So, okay, so, it's important to be warm. You can see this big drafty castle behind them. So, it's probably a cold place that they live in. Denmark, Northern Europe, in around 1100 AD would probably not be very warm. For all of that, her clothing is very light in color. So that says something about, her age, maybe her personality. You want to think maybe she's a little innocent, but also something about her class. Because if you could afford white clothing or very pale clothing, it means you could afford to have laundry done because things could get stained very easily. So you had to have a certain amount of clout to have this light colored clothing. But it's very simple, right? She's not all dripping in jewels and satins and gold embroidery. So she's not royal. Her hair is down in braids. That usually means she's not married. If she was a married woman, her hair would be coiled up under a cap. She does have a little cap on. It seems to be tied under her chin maybe or tied behind her neck, but you can see most of her hair. This is her with Mel Gibson in the breakup scene. Again, very light colored clothing. She's in layers again. Her hair is a little bit softer, and she's got kind of a pinkish or purplish dress with a white or off-white kind of apron over it. And you can see in that top picture, she's got a little gold barrette holding her hair back. So her hair is down and a little bit softer. There's a little hint of color here. But still very modest, very plain, very sweet. And as you can see, Hamlet is all in black, so they're a contrasting color between the two of them. Now we see Helena Bonham Carter as Ophelia for her mad scene. This is almost identical to the dress and overdress that she was wearing in that last scene. Like, I think we're supposed to think it's the same dress, but the color is a lot darker. And as you can see, also, this outfit has been distressed, right? Just like we can distress scenery, we distress clothing to make it look old, worn, dirty, uncared for, what have you. And you can see it looks dirty, like she's been trailing through the mud. It looks ragged at the bottom. You can see that she is barefoot. You can see that her hair is down. She doesn't have any kind of barrette or anything in it. You can see in that close-up picture, the laces that are used to tie her sleeve in place are undone. She's very unkempt. She doesn't look like she cares about her body or her clothes, or maybe she's not even aware about her body or her clothes. So there's kind of every indication in these images that this is a person in distress. And this is Ophelia mad because her father has been killed by her boyfriend. This is from a 2000 production of Hamlet, and Lisa Gay Hamilton is starring as Ophelia. So this is images of her with her dad and her brother. So you can see totally different time period. This is about 1900. So the clothing style is very different, but a lot of the same ideas about character are still here. She's a young girl. She's wearing very light colored clothing. She's modestly dressed. She's wearing a fashionable silhouette here, but not like flashy fashionable, right? There's still a sense of innocence about her, a sense of modesty. You can see she's got some demure pearl earrings there. Her hair is done up very nicely. But she doesn't look, like the top of the social chain here. Here she is with her breakup scene outfit, a big change in color. She's got some dangly earrings. Her hair is in a more elaborate style, and she's got a rose tucked in her hair. Something about this, when I look at this, I feel like this is an attempt for her to be seductive without being scandalous, right? She's in this purple with the red flower in her hair, and that's all kind of like Valentine colors, and they're darker than like, a pearly pink. So there's a little bit hint of sexual allure there. Again, it's still very modest. Right? She's not like wandering around in lingerie, but you can see her collarbone. You can see that the silhouette is very tight to her waist there, so it's showing off her form within the fashionable silhouette of 1900 to 1910. And this is Lisa Gay Hamilton for Ophelia's Mad Scene. Now check out what she's wearing here. She's got a night dress on, probably what she wears to bed, but over that she's got a blood-stained man's white vest and black tuxedo jacket. She is wearing her father's clothes. She is wearing the clothes that her father was wearing when he was stabbed to death by Hamlet. Again, you can't see her feet, but she's barefoot. And again, her hair is completely unkempt. She has no more jewelry, right? This is a woman who is clearly obsessed and undone by the violent death of her dad. So this outfit, it's very off-putting because it's so wildly inappropriate for the royal setting that she's in. I mean, it's pretty inappropriate for anybody to walk around wearing bloodstained clothing, and it's so jarring. And you kind of are at once, or at least I am, kind of repelled, and also just my heart goes out to this poor woman who's suffering so clearly. Here's Kate Winslet with her dad, Ophelia's dad, from the Kenneth Branagh film from 1996. So as I was saying before, right, she's in bright red. Um, she is in this kind of military silhouette, this feminine version of a military silhouette. I don't think she's a member of the army, but this is just this idea that the court is so all about military might and masculine power that even the women have somewhat adopted this style. Sort of like women adopting camouflage in the 1990s during the Gulf War. So you can see, right, some of her outfit echoes her dad's with the brass buttons, with the shape of that collar, with the piping down the center. She's got a sash. She's even got this little tiny shoulder boards that imitate the epaulets that her dad is wearing, but it's a feminine version of what her dad is wearing. You can see that this is a woman's figure. The silhouette is, fairly revealing of her form, even though it's all covered up. And they're wearing the same kind of fabric in different colors. Here she is for her breakup scene. This is probably like linen. And again, similar colors to that last one. There's flower print all over her dress. And there's this little kind of like sailor collar to it. And again, her hair is down and soft and wavy. This is a much softer look than that look in just the last slide. So there's this kind of sense of like, I'm so innocent, I'm literally a flower. How could I cause you any harm? Aren't I cute? So a little less kind of sexy maybe than the last one, but still kind of setting a bit of a trap. And as you can see, Hamlet is having none of it. And here is Ophelia, Kate Winslet, for her mad scene. She has been straitjacketed, and it looks like her hair has been shaved, and she is wearing a cap over her head, suggesting that maybe she is undergoing some intensive electric shock therapy. This production of Hamlet is set vaguely in the like mid to late 1800s, and so this is all, kind of keeping with what people would have done with mad women at that time. This is Mariah Gale from the BBC's 2010 version of Hamlet with David Tennant as Hamlet. So I couldn't get as many good pictures of her outfits here, but she's in either a skirt or pants and a short-sleeved silky blouse with some sort of flower pattern on it. And her hair is kind of half up, half down in a ponytail. Here she is for the breakup scene. She's in, a cocktail dress and lots of skin showing, and her hair is, more formal, and she's in more formal clothing. Contrast that with Hamlet, David Tennant over there in a t-shirt and jeans. And you can tell these people are not on the same wavelength. And here she is for her mad scene. Really don't see much of her costume in this one, but you can see like her blouse is kind of undone and open, and her hair is quite disheveled. Her makeup is quite disheveled. She's got what looks like a bruise on her collarbone. So again, a woman who is not taking care of herself and seems to be distressed. Let's hop way back in time to 1948. This is Gene Simmons playing Ophelia in the Laurence Olivier movie with the costumes by Robert Furse. So in the 1940s, people weren't really concerned about delivering a historically accurate recreation of historic period. They were just kind of like oldie timey close enoughy. And so they put her in this dress, which just as a costume historian, I really hate. It's pretty vile. And the hair, I don't even begin to understand. Leaves kind of like baby Swiss Miss braids, and then the rest of it's down her back. But it looks very 1940s to me, and also very kind of like, I don't really know what time period it is. It's just back in the day. Um, but even so, right? Light colored, modest silhouette, feminine silhouette, this little hint of floral trim around the bodice, that kind of net modesty panel on the neckline of the dress so that we're not seeing her cleavage right out there. There's kind of the poofy sleeves. So you can see this is her breakup scene. I don't know who would be seduced by this outfit, but in her case, again, it didn't work. And here's Gene Simmons for her Ophelia Mad scene. Same kind of crazy Swiss Miss hairdo, but now she's got these silk flowers woven into it. And her dress, I can't tell if it's not the same dress, but it looks almost like a 19th century statue of what an 18th century kind of shepherdess might look like. It's jarring to me looking at this, 70 years after the film was made, um, that they they have kind of romanticized her madness a little bit. Her hair doesn't look a mess. It looks like she had it done at the salon and stuck some flowers in it. And it's still quite luxurious. You can see all of those curling waves and tresses kind of going down her back. But so this is kind of a more romantic view of her madness. It's a little bit shying away from just the awfulness of what it must be like to be her, which I think says a lot about what people felt audiences were ready for in the late 1940s than about what Ophelia maybe was actually going through. Not to say it's a bad choice, right? Because they certainly were coming from an informed position and they were trying to serve the needs of the director and of the show, but they just made a different choice than some of these other Ophelias. And lastly, this is Julia Stiles playing Ophelia. This is the opening, or Act 1, Scene 3. This is from the movie version that stars Ethan Hawke. And in this rendition, instead of Elsinore being a castle, Elsinore is a corporation. And so old Hamlet and now Claudius were the CEO of the corporation. And so in this universe, Ophelia works for the company. So she's, again, a young adult woman. Um, and you kind of get the sense that, yeah, she's a grown up, but she's also still a little girlish playing grown up person. And you can see that in kind of like this high-low skirt, her kind of, Phoebe Buffet hairdo that she's got going on. And I think most tellingly, her sneakers that are very like skater girl, while she's trying to be kind of edgy business attire. She's definitely not in a, boring office worker suit. She's trying to be kind of like edgy and youthful while still kind of dressing a little bit professionally, and in this, kind of power color of red. But she's very much still, to me, I see a girl who's not quite ready to be fully adult. And so that's kind of a clue as to how Ophelia might be able to handle some of the stuff that's going to be thrown her way later in the movie.